Well, welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for making it here during this very, very rainy day in the morning. We're very grateful that we can see the dedication in supporting right to higher education of students with disability. To start, let me first give really great gratitude to our host, the UN Office of South-South Cooperation. And also a few logistics before we start this meeting. On the screen, theoretically, we should see the slides, which was there a couple of minutes ago. Well, I'm sure we'll come back. But also welcome to our online participants. On the bottom of the Zoom call, you will see the interpretation option, which we have both Spanish and sign language. So kindly choose whatever that can be helpful for you to join this event. Wonderful. Any questions on logistics? No? Okay. Well, now I see that my dear co-moderator is here, so we can officially start. Please let us first express our really great appreciation, not only to our host, the UN Office of South-South Cooperation, but also to our dear partners for this event, the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Queen's University, University of Gondar, Global Student Forum, Stakeholder Group of Persons with Disabilities, UNESCO SDG for Youth Students, UNESCO SDG for Youth and Student Network, and last but not least, the Dublin Technology University. Thank you so much. With that being said, I hope our slide will come back, which it was earlier. Yes, wonderful. As part of the ECOSOC Youth Forum 2024, we're really gathered here to have this conversation on inclusion of higher education and and highlighting the role that young people can play in this regard, not only to just represent equity deserving groups, but to contribute to promoting the rights, to promoting the action, and to work together for students with disability, and work together with students who are from other equity deserving groups or share this intersectional identity of equity deserving groups. My name is Lily. I work for UNESCO IESALC as the head of partnership and UN liaison, who's the co-host of the event. And I'm very honored to be here to co-moderate with this fantastic young activist from Canada. So if I may, I'll do a very quick introduction of who he is. So Mr. Eugenio Emilio Sierlandini is really passionate about his city and community in Toronto. Eugenio empowers youth by teaching the power of self-advocacy through debate and public service. And as a member of Toronto Youth Cabinet and a pluralism steward, he really nurtures inclusive growth within his community and ensuring every voice is heard and valued. So welcome, Eugenio.
Thank you. It's an honor and privilege to be here today, and an honor and privilege to share what we have planned for you guys.
Wonderful. So maybe to start, let me ask you, when you heard about this event and when you accepted our invitation to join us, what is your expectation on what to be covered?
So ultimately, my expectation was that me and the other participants in this event would leave with something, leave with steps to be able to address the inclusivity gap for students with disabilities. Any matter of education is a matter that I will be involved with and that I will involve myself in. I see it as my mission to help people find their fulfillment and address any gap that stops somebody from finding their fulfillment, their true joy, regardless of whatever I do in the future. That will always be a part of my mission, and I hope that it's a part of yours.
Wonderful, thank you. And one thing to really highlight is that Eugenia is finishing high school and entering higher education. And as someone who's considered as a student in transition, it's very important and very touching to hear the dedication ready to grow.
Exactly. It's important that even at this juncture, we have people who are passionate about it. trying to help equity deserving individuals and trying to level the playing field.
Wonderful. So let's hear first from Mr. Francis Pedro, who is the director of UNESCO International Institute for Higher Education, to really pave out the ground on the right to higher education topic.
Thank you. Thank you, Lily. Thank you, Eugene, for this nice introduction. I would like to start by expressing our gratitude on behalf of UNESCO to all the panelists and to the rest of participants for being here. The UNESCO Institute for Higher Education has been devoting some time and efforts over the past, I would say, almost 3 years to the analysis of what the practical meaning of the right to higher education is. And in our work, we have conducted 15 different case studies, all of them related to, in particular, countries in the Global South. And there are some findings that I would like to share with you when it comes to the particular case of inclusion of students with disabilities in higher education. To begin with, we run a consultation involving students and students with disabilities. And it's nice to say that when they are confronted with the question, how happy you are with the measures that your institution has been taking to ensure inclusion, I would say that almost 80% of them aren't satisfied. Okay, and that's probably because three main reasons that they put on the table. The first one is that they acknowledge that there have been a number of physical changes, architectural initiatives that may have improved very much accessibility, but they still feel that they are like an outlier when it comes to the higher education institution provision. So they feel like they are like they use the word add-on. So it's not really that they feel part of the wider community. They simply, add a bit of a touch, like a bit of a new flavor to the existing provision, which is in a way saying that the actual provision hasn't changed. It hasn't accommodated to the particular needs of those students. So I think that this feeling of dissatisfaction has to be put at the forefront, because it means really that no matter how nice our words are, the practices haven't changed so much as these students in particular are looking for. They also mentioned 3 practical reasons, and I'm going to finish with this just to pave the way for the other panelists. They mentioned 3 main reasons for this dissatisfaction. The first one is that they don't feel that the culture has changed. So once again, they see in the eyes of the people they are meeting, their student mates, their professors, the authorities, they don't see really the kind of welcoming feeling that they would be expecting. Even more, some of them, not all, some of them have said that I haven't found any dean, any chair of the department that shares with me a physical disability. So it's difficult to feel really at home when the authorities, the power resides in people that do not look like you, okay? Which is in a way saying that, people with disabilities haven't reached yet those levels of decision making. Okay. That's the first reason. The second one is that they would expect that governments in particular are much more hard at expressing not only the, I would say, how they put it, the importance of the right to education, but also acknowledging that we are in a transition phase where the particular needs of students with disabilities have to be recognized by law, by regulations, both at national and institutional level. This doesn't seem to be the case, at least in those countries we have explored. And finally, I think that this is really a shocking finding. They say, we know that we are expensive. I mean, meaning by that, the provision of higher education would be cheaper if they didn't have to count on us, okay? But we also recognize at the same time that without us, justice, social justice, is not taking place in higher education institutions. I will leave it with that. not really with my thoughts, but rather with the thoughts of those people we interview. And I think that they are really important because they help us to set the scene. Thank you very much. Back to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pedro, with really, your experience, not only just at higher education, but also in education policy. We look forward to hearing more from you on your insight in providing support to higher education in regard to right to higher education. So now we're going to move to Mr. Real Hada, who is currently leading the Office of Higher Commissioners for Human Rights, thematic engagement in New York on equality and non-discrimination, sustainable development, and rule of law to mainstream human rights in interagency and intergovernmental discussions at the UN headquarters. Mr. Real Hada, with your really extensive experience working on economics, social, cultural rights, as well as coordinating UN interagency effort to integrate human rights in policies and programs, can you please share and present some of the OHCHR insights into the global landscape of rights of persons with disability, with special focus on higher education and fighting poverty?
Thank you very much, and I'm very happy to be here among partners and friends. So, equality, non-discrimination, and inclusions are a central, a cornerstone of human rights, and they're central to the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development with its promise of leaving no one behind. So, advancing the rights of persons with disabilities have been a priority focus of our office for many years now. And the Convention on Persons with Disabilities has been a guiding post to ensure and promote the inclusions of the diverse population of persons with disability, including women and girls, and some of the more underrepresented groups, such as persons with intellectual disabilities or psychosocial disabilities. And despite the progress that's been made in recent years, persons with disabilities continue to face numerous barriers to their full inclusion and participation in the life of their communities. Poverty is disproportionately prevalent among persons with disabilities. Access to education, health services, and employment remain elusive for many of them in many parts of the world. And they're underrepresented in decision-making and political processes. And this is particularly the case for women and girls with disabilities. There are many barriers to their inclusion, discrimination and stigma, lack of accessibility to physical and virtual environments, lack of access to assistive technology, essential services, lack of support for independent living that are critical for their full participation as agents of change. And access to education, including higher education, is no exception to this, but education also holds a key to open many doors, because education is a fundamental human right. And not only that, it is also an enabling right for individual development and full and effective participation in society. And still, too many persons with disabilities continue to be denied this fundamental right because of the barriers and obstacles that I just mentioned, including access to education, prejudice and discrimination, lack of qualified teachers to accommodate the needs of persons with disabilities, as well as inaccessible schools and educational materials. There's also lack of disaggregated data and research also impede the development of effective policies and programs. So I'm very glad to hear the efforts done by UNESCO to consult with students with disabilities to gather experience and evidence that will feed into those policies. So I'd like to make 3 quick points in this opening segment. First, we need a holistic approach to inclusive education. It's obvious that higher education is seen as a culmination of a continuous educational journey. So addressing access to higher education cannot be seen as on its own, but as a part of the whole educational journey, not just the final stage. The second, support and incentives. For students who overcome barriers in primary and secondary education, there must be substantial support and incentives to go on higher. This includes creating an enabling environment that values their capabilities and provides accessibilities, reasonable accommodations, and financial support. And some of those, Francesca just mentioned those. And third, and I end with this, we need to fight discrimination and keep the door open to all. Access to higher education must start with the non-rejection clause to combat structural discrimination. But the true access involves more than just entry. It requires full inclusions rather than mere integration into the system. I look forward to discussion. I'm here as much as to learn from your experience and stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Ryohara, and also not just for this inside intervention, but also for the support and the collaboration that we have had in regard to the Right to Higher Education project. So thank you so much. And next, we would really like to hear from Ms. Heather Aldersey, who is the special advisor to the Queen's University Principal on the UN Sustainable Development Goals, as well as an associate professor and kind of research chair at Queen's University, in really highlighting the institutional effort to ensure rights to students, especially students with disability, and its really relevancy to institutional efforts towards the realization of SDGs. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thanks, Lily. As my colleagues have already mentioned, youth with disabilities experience cycles of marginalization, including accessing basic education first and foremost, and then high school and tertiary education after that. And limited access to education then leads to limited opportunities for meaningful employment later on in life. And it's really important to mention that women and girls and others who experience layers of marginalization also experience even more disadvantage. And when looking at progress towards the UN Sustainable Development Goals, I again echo my colleague that we really need disability disaggregated data, because even when you look at those areas, those indicators where we are making really great progress, you talk about universal basic education, basic primary education. When you look closer at those numbers, if you've got 99%, basic primary education, who's that 1%? Who's that left behind? And far too often, it is people who experience these layers of marginalization and particularly disability. So it's really important to have an understanding of disability disaggregated data when we're looking at progress to the goals. But gains have been made, largely due to the tireless advocacy of people with disabilities, organizations of people with disabilities, and their families. But they shouldn't be alone in this advocacy, and we really all have a responsibility to act. So through our conversation today, my colleagues and I hope to share our experiences at the tertiary education level, leveraging institutional partnerships to advance SDG 4 and then ultimately SDG 1. And today we hope to hear from others' experiences in the room and explore how we all might move forward together, stronger in our advocacy for the realization of human rights and full inclusion of persons with disabilities globally. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Heather. With higher education hosting more than 200 million students, higher education has a very specific role when it comes to talking about rights. And now that we have had this very great teaser and the institutional efforts dedicated to supporting students, especially students with disability, it will really be helpful to hear from the student perspective. So next one, who's our last speaker for this really opening remark segment is Mr. Yeka Blasis, who's the Executive Director of Global Student Forum and the official Danish youth delegate to the UN, with his very extensive experience working in the field of policy, internationalization, sustainable education, global funding for education, and really linking how to engage young people in decision making and on the value of investing long-term in education systems, especially in the global south. Can you please provide your insights on linking SDG 1, 4, and 17 from the perspective of students, especially in working with students with disabilities?
Thank you so much. I'm also really happy to be here today with all of you, and also looking forward to learn from the different perspectives that people are bringing to the table. The core thing when it comes to students with disability is that often the voice of the students with the disabilities are not in the room. It's a lot of people talking about students with disabilities, but not talking with students with disabilities. I spent a lot of my time working in the Global Student Forum and as a youth delegate to the UN, focusing on bringing youth voices into decision-making spaces. And that in of itself is very difficult a lot of the times. People don't want to listen to young people, people don't want to listen to students. If you on top of that have the experiences and the limitations and the struggles that often comes with having a disability, you have that on top of it. And I think as a student organization with 197 organizations in its membership from 127 countries, we have a particular responsibility to also include those voices in our work. And we are still figuring out how we do that in the best way, because we have a very big membership in many countries. And what we often see is that accessing even our own structures can be difficult. So we have a particular focus on making sure that students with disabilities, students who have refugee backgrounds, also come to the table in our internal processes. So I think there is really a core thing when we think about ourselves as advocates for students with disabilities, that we as the students who do not have disabilities needs to be allies. We need to be open. We need to find ways of working together. We cannot just be talking about, but also need to be talking with students with disabilities, because otherwise we are repeating the mistakes that we're trying to correct in the world. There are still so many issues that students with disabilities are facing when it comes to access to higher education. And it's everything from the culture, the discursive cultures around who belongs in higher education. There's still many students who are being told that, oh, you have a disability. Well, higher education might not be the right thing for you. And that prevents a lot of people from even thinking that it is an opportunity. And then if a student gets into higher education, having systems that can actually support them and actually makes it possible for them to complete their education is so scattered and different across the world, but even across countries. It varies a lot from institution to institution, and that prevents students from mobility in education systems. It also prevents them from knowing what are the opportunities before they start. So they arrive at higher education institutions, might not knowing what opportunities they have here, and if they had made different choices, that they had different opportunities. So the standards are extremely scattered around everywhere. So there's a lot of conversations that we are having in the Global Student Forum at the moment about how do we make sure that the experiences of the student organizations in our membership are being shared across the world. How are we making sure that the good advocacy efforts that one national student union might be doing in one country can inspire other organizations in other countries and learn from those kind of successes? Because I think that's our core thing as the Global Student Forum. We go into global decision-making spaces, but we also have a responsibility on the ground to make sure that local experiences are also transferred to other contexts. And I think that would be my opening remark.
Thank you so much, Jacob. It's just really sad, but touching in a way to hear that challenges are different. But there are hopes in gapping those challenges and the differences and bringing transferability in terms of solutions. And I think one thing that Jacob really mentioned that stuck to me is the question of who belongs, right? And I want to turn to Eugenia, as someone who's entering higher education, who belongs and what are your hopes and concerns in regard to the question of who belongs for right to higher education?
Awesome. So I think something that I take away from this contribution is the fact that in what was spoken about, different types of marginalization that occur in this situation, is that each person in this room knows that we all belong in higher education institutes, and that the barriers to inclusion are less obvious than we might think. And those barriers might be not knowing what access exactly that you have when you get into the higher education institution, which was quite poignant in my mind, right? Because you may be able to enter these institutions, but you do not know exactly what you're getting. And this kind of gap here is quite significant. And there's an element of access fatigue in the studies that I've been reading, that, people who have a disability are forced to continue to ask, continue to just try to figure out what type of access they have instead of it being clear and instead of it being universal and it being provided. Yes, the situation requires different things. However, it should not be treated any differently than any other individual. And the lack of information and that information gap must be provided to show that people do belong, regardless of whatever condition that they may have. They do belong in these spaces. And I think that's extremely important to remember how our signaling might affect inclusion and might affect the self-perception of students with different disabilities. Awesome. So I'm going to pass it back to.
Thank you so much, Eugenia. And he really leads the way to our first round of discussion on identifying gaps and opportunities. And with that said, I would first like to invite our very dear UNESCO SDG for Youth and Student member, Ms. Juliet Goodsnatch. Juliet is an autistic self-advocate and also a PhD student in special education at Columbia University. While she's serving as a member of UNESCO's SDG for Youth and Student Network, she's the Inclusive and Equitable Education Thematic Area Co-Lead. She's also the CEO and founder of Autism and Neurodivergency Advocacy Association. So, Julia, based on your experience and also your observation and work with other young people, can you please share, from the regard of institutional support, but from the perspective of students, what kind of institutional support is needed to create a whole institutional environment to best enable inclusion for all higher education, as well as, what kind of linkages are needed in terms of reality and of course, the gaps and opportunities. Thank you.
Is this on? Okay. Yeah, thank you for having me here today. I'll just give a brief visual description for more accessibility. So I'm a white woman with dark brown hair, wearing tinted red glasses, and I'm wearing a black blazer. And like Lily said, I am autistic and a disabled self-advocate and current student in higher education. All right, so when we think about advocating for fundamental human rights of students with disabilities and fostering a culture of inclusion within higher education, the role of institutional support cannot be overstated. We need to be looking at accessibility of resources within the classroom and not just acknowledging this, but actively ensuring this for students with disabilities. And we need to make sure, like one of my colleagues said, that we have diverse representation within leadership, faculty, and staff of academic institutions. This serves as not just a beacon of hope for marginalized disabled students, but really lays the groundwork for a deeper understanding and genuine sense of belonging. I also want to make a note about the lack of institutional support for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities who are frequently left out of higher education, and people with disabilities in active war zones, and those experiencing poverty who usually don't have access to higher education. Further, I'd like to highlight the education and employment gap of autistic adults, which is my community, even in higher income countries. 5 years after completing high school, less than 20% of autistic college students have graduated or were on track to do so. And an alarming 85% of autistic students who completed higher education, which means they obtained their degree, are currently unemployed in the United States. So this is a serious issue that needs to be addressed. And I really think the systemic ableism that persists within academia necessitates a comprehensive approach to disability cultural competence training for faculty and staff. This needs to address the nature of implicit bias, microaggressions, and just the imperative of truly inclusive learning environments. And moreover, we need a wide array of support services tailored to the diverse needs of students with disabilities. And this is not just a convenience, but a matter of convenience, but a fundamental human rights imperative. And obviously, the realization of these ideals face formidable challenges rooted in ableist systemic barriers. Things like resource constraints, poverty, war, and the pervasive nature of ableist stigmatizing attitudes pose significant obstacles to progress. Yet within these challenges lies the opportunity for transformative change. We can amplify disabled voices and awareness efforts and actively involve students in decision-making processes where we can truly embody the principle of nothing about us without us and foster a collaborative ethos. So in conclusion, through uniting together administrators, educators, and most importantly, the past, present, and future students themselves, we can strive to create an educational landscape where every individual, regardless of their disability status, can fully realize their potential and contribute meaningfully to society. And this vision should not be merely aspirational. It should be a reflection of a shared commitment to upholding the principles of equity, dignity, and human rights. And this aligns closely with the ethos of the United Nations as a whole and the SDGs, particularly SDG 4, which is quality education.
Thank you so much. Not only presenting from a student perspective, but also from a personal perspective. So I would now like to turn the floor to Professor Molalian Abganya, who will also not only share from an institutional perspective, but also share from a personal perspective from his experience of having more than 10 years in teaching, research, administrative experience, working for University of Gondar, but also from his own work, working with youth with disabilities in education, in transition, entrepreneurship, and employability opportunities. So now the floor is yours, Professor Molo, to really elaborate on where do you see the gaps and opportunities to support institutional inclusion for students with disability?
Thank you, Lily. I wish if I speak on the perspective of students because in my daily work, I spend my time with students with disabilities at the University of Gondar. So from the experience, we realize inclusion matters. It matters for students with disabilities. It matters for every stakeholder in institution. Working in low-income setting in a very peripheral university in Africa, in Ethiopia, we see so many challenges. But at the same time, there are also culturally and locally available support system. If I prioritize some of the challenges, one is related to the training and education, especially for faculty members, for educational leaders to have that necessary skill to support to work with students with disabilities. And there's also the mindset challenge that we need to have a paradigm shift, understanding what disability means, what inclusive education means. We have to unpack and try to translate it into the local context. We see that kind of challenge among stakeholders. And accessibility is a big issue. In our university, we conduct accessibility audit. What are the physical space inaccessible physical condition, the social related issues, and the administrative. So always we try to bring different stakeholders in university service providers in the workshop, and we bring students to share their lived experience. We learned that when students share their lived experience, they can teach us. They can teach the leadership how can we best to support. And the other is there's inadequate support system because resources limited in developing countries. So there is a commitment from leadership, but sometimes we lack enough resource to leverage that process. And technology is important. We need assistive devices. Without technology, we cannot talk inclusion. For a person with visual impairment, they need white cane. for person hearing impairment, they need hearing aids and different software. Like in developing countries, it's very difficult to access the software and to access the technologies. One is they are not affordable, the other is they may not be available in the market in developing countries. But having said this challenge, we see some opportunities. The beauty of collaboration and partnership is important. We benefit from Queen's University, MasterCard Foundation, and other stakeholders. Even we work with Ethiopian Human Rights Commission. They are, they are taking, our responsibilities to the national level. We work with Ethiopian lawyers, with Disability Association. They advocate for us. So partnership is important. We see that kind of commitment. And student involvement. For example, in our scholar program, there is a Scholars Council. First, as administrator, we hesitate to bring them into decision-making process. But once we invited them, they make our work easy because they teach us, they show us the way, how can we do or move forward with our program. So we can, that kind of fertile ground is upcoming. There is, of course, some scholastic materials and, as I said, assistive devices which are affordable and local products, private sectors involved to produce them, which is important. And the support from university leadership we see and from other stakeholders also important. There are also local and national efforts to talk about inclusion and inclusive education. So these are, and the other is promoting of inclusive practice, expansion of support system is very important. I would like to end this. There is ever growing number of persons with disabilities in developing countries, especially in Ethiopia. So we talk about business or politics by numbers. So when the number of students increase from university, they challenge, they teach the university leadership. So everybody is now conscious and to work with the student. And the other is once a student becomes successful, see the value of education, they are the one who drive the change. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Molo. I think, from combining what Juliet and Dr. Molo mentioned, there are three key messages that once stuck with me. The number one is we need audit. We need monitoring and evaluation. Well, right to higher education may be an area that's very hard to quantify. It is very necessary that in some way we'll be able to track the progress we have made, to identify the gaps, and to further design the opportunities that we'll be able to ride along. And the second very important message is we need different stakeholders. This is not just an institutional responsibility, but rather we need to engage the public sector, we need to engage the private sector, we need to engage civil society, which, at this moment, the civil society have done so much in this regard. So we need to bring other stakeholders on board to work together. And the third message is really that reflecting also from an event that we supported this morning, also on student with disability and hosted by our other partner, major stakeholder group of persons with disability. The message came out very clearly that education or higher education does not stand by itself. If we want to engage young people in the process of the future, not just zombie out the future, but the future itself, we need to find a way. And a lot of students, they don't spend that much time in school. They spend a lot of time in family and community. So with that said, Eugenia, I want to turn to you, based on your experience working in community, how do you see the link of the relationship of community and higher education, and how some of the practices, especially good practices, that will have the capacity to be transferred when students like you are being transited into higher education?
Perfect. So I want to start off by saying people like Professor Molo make the difference, right? In listening to his contribution, you can see how, there are people in this world who will dedicate their time, will dedicate their hearts to making a difference on the ground. And this is extremely important when you zoom out and you realize how many different stakeholders are part of this process in higher education alone, also in primary education as well. How there are teachers, how there are administrators, how there are government officials, and how there are students, and how they each have their own responsibility when it comes to different issues that we're trying to solve, right? When you look at it from the perspective of a teacher, in a study that covered 2011 to, I believe, 2021, and kind of went over the different complaints and the different reviews from students with disabilities on what could be changed. And the number one thing actually fell with the educators in creating an inclusive environment. And the creation of inclusive and pluralistic environments is extremely important to help address marginalization, address stigma. And that may just be step one. Then there's what happens with administrators and how administrators can be the mouthpiece to bridge students, to bridge staff with with their schools and with whoever is running the different rules that have to do with the institution itself. There are a lot of different levels which we can help, and it's the partnerships that we create there, and it's that connectability that we can use to make sure each person is represented. Students have a role in that too. So as a student going into university, like the University of Toronto, I'm already looking at whichever networks that I can use to help advocate for fellow students, because we also have a responsibility. Every single kind of step on this ladder and the circular flow diagram has a responsibility together as a community to fight for each other. And I think that's quite important to remember. It starts with us, the students, and it starts with the educators, administrators, government officials. We're all working together. Message of community is something that I'm taking from this meeting here, and it is extremely important to remember as we work towards solutions. Awesome, I'm going to pass it back to Lily.
Thank you so much, Eugenia. So now we have talked about gaps and opportunities. It's important to also bring the light and see what have worked. With that said, I want to give the floor back to Professor Heather and Professor Molo to elaborate more on the meaningful partnership for advancing the right of higher education for students with disability.
Thank you, Lily. So I'm just so honored and delighted to share our experiences so far partnering with the University of Gondar in Ethiopia and the MasterCard Foundation to support higher education of students in the East Africa, the Horn of Africa. So this project that we're sharing about today, it's a 10-year project. We're 7 years in, and it really started from a place of shared interest and strengths. University of Gondar and Queen's University were put together by the MasterCard Foundation because of our institutional strengths in community-based rehabilitation and disability inclusion. From there, we co-created this project together, and we have there's two parts of the project. The first part is the University of Gondar offers 450 scholarships to talented but disadvantaged youth with disabilities and youth who are refugees or who experience other disadvantages to do undergraduate and master's degree programs at the University of Gondar. And then Queen's University comes in the second part, where we support University of Gondar in institutional capacity strengthening to support the students with disabilities at their institution. So through this program, by the end of the project, we will have delivered 44 PhDs to faculty members from the University of Gondar at Queen's University in disciplines that cross from history to development studies to engineering, nursing, rehabilitation science, education. The uniting feature of those PhDs is the focus on disability inclusion within the dissertation. We have also collaborated with the University of Gondar to, by the end of the program, we will have educated 16 faculty members in our Master's of Occupational Therapy at Queen's. And the colleagues who have graduated have returned to University of Gondar and with Queen's support started the first ever undergraduate occupational therapy program at the University of Gondar that is now recognized by the World Federation of Occupational Therapists. We've also worked with the University of Gondar to create a CBR certificate training program that they offer to their scholars with disabilities. And we've supported 8 collaborative research projects that have principal investigators from both Queen's and the University of Gondar doing research, again, across many different disciplines related to disability inclusion in Ethiopia and Africa more broadly. The leadership of this project is completely shared leadership. We've got, Dr. Molo is my counterpart. We're the co-directors of the project. We also have co-managers, both on the Ethiopian and the Canadian side. And we also engage with active current students in our leadership structure. To give you a bit more insight about the work that we're doing, we recognize that who's not here in this room right now? Well, it's actually the scholars with disabilities themselves. Due to visa inequities, it was simply impossible to get them to the United States. And so we wanted to take a lot of our time to show a video that shares the scholars' stories themselves and gives you a bit of a picture of the University of Gondar in Ethiopia. So please, whoever's queuing up the video, you can go ahead and show that now.
coming up in a second because we'll just stop sharing the screen of the slides and move
Sure.
to the YouTube.
So I can take the opportunity and this.
There should be some, right? Okay. We'll reshare with sound. So, Dr. Molo, if you can please start.
I was about to say we give scholarship for other students from East African countries, from South Sudan, Somalia, and Somaliland, Eritrean refugees, and from Djibouti. And we are also starting working. Our theory of change is to have very inclusive recruitment process, because we try to do our best to reach out to those students with disabilities in rural areas, in very peripheral areas. That's one. Once we bring them to university, we engage them in different training, leadership, and entrepreneurship, because we need to support their transition. One is from high school to university, and then from university to the workplace. Because what we learned is, so far, we help some students to graduate, but once they graduate, it's very challenging for them to get a job. So we work with different stakeholders and having job fair and working with potential employers. Then we are trying to help them to get a job, and some of them also start their own business in a small scale, having that kind of training. And my colleagues before, they say about the cultural exchange. So we establish a host family program where we connect the student with the University of Gondar University community, where scholar can interact with the community outside of the campus. They can also involve and make friends and continue interacting with the community and learning. And we're also using scholars' lived experience and perspectives to advocate, working with the different stakeholders again. And we have this clear alumni support strategy. And so in general, we are focusing on empowering individual students and creating institutional capacity, but at the same time, advocating and creating societal change. So in doing so, we try to our best to help anyone to be accessible and to have all access to get empowered, to contribute more, and on the, to fulfill their meaningful life. And then the key learnings and aspirations, opportunities we share from our scholar. So if there are sound, there is the English caption, maybe we can see the video.
We'll bring the sound back.
One important thing is to create disability awareness in that local setting. It's very challenging. Then we have scholars with disabilities who have talent, because they went to boarding school, church education, they have a voice, they have art skill. So we train them with the support of art experts, and the students organize events. They prepare music video, they prepare CD, a poem, and then they bring all you can see, students with disabilities, without disabilities, community members, all they come together, they're interacting, and there is the beauty of art to bring everyone into one stage.
Thank you so much, Professor Heather and Professor Molo. We now have the caption. And
I
we
know-
got the tech, so hopefully help is on the way.
Well, and I know we're running behind too, so we can also maybe share this video link with people, with the attendees after the fact, so that they could view in their own time as well.
Okay, we'll make sure to do that. Thank you so much. We also called the tech. We'll see if the tech can bring the sound back before the session ends, so we can conclude with this beautiful testimony from the field.
Yeah, I would encourage people to see the video, hearing their stories, because even they don't have beautiful stories, they teach the community. Even one of the scholars say positive revenge to my community, because he used to be considered worthless, but now he became educated, studied law. He got employed by Minister of Justice in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Then now everybody is looking for help with him. So he say, I revenge the community in a positive way. So there are lots of stories. So please watch those videos. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Now let's move to our next speaker, Ms. Lydia Voxma, representing the Stakeholder Group of Persons with Disability. Lydia works in Netherlands as a disability advocate. As a policy officer, her focus areas are accessible and inclusive vocational and higher education and the implementation of the UNCRPD in the Netherlands. Additionally, she's a youth representative in the Youth Committee of European Disability Forum. In this role, she combines her professional expertise on disability rights with her personal experience as a young woman with invisible disability and chronic illness. Unfortunately, Lydia is not able to join us in person today, but she has kindly sent a video to share success stories from stakeholder groups of persons with disability with a focus on innovation.
My name is Lydia Vlagsma, and I'm here representing young people with disabilities. And it's such a nice opportunity to be here and to send in a pre-recorded message. I'm unfortunately not able to attend in person, but I am here in New York, just recording this from the hotel room. So if you would like to chat a bit more about inclusive education or about disability representation, feel free to shoot me a message or to tackle me somewhere in the UN headquarters. Higher education and the accessibility of it for students with disabilities is a topic that is really close to my heart. Being a chronically ill young woman myself, and I've taught in universities as well, it really made me notice how inaccessible and rigid these spaces can be for young people with disabilities. Not just in the way that education is organized, but also in the way just the physical school buildings are often so inaccessible, and also inaccessibility of digital means, so digital learning materials, electronic learning devices and environments. And then there's also this huge component of interpersonal discrimination, bullying, not just between students, but also between students and teachers. And one final thing is also the transition to the labor market, which can be really difficult for students with disabilities. For example, when they encounter discrimination when they're looking for an internship. So these topics are all very urgent and I think very crucial to also discuss in these spaces. So I'm very happy to have been invited here on the panel. Okay, so I think there's two ways of looking at this issue of inclusive higher education. And one of it is the one I just spoke about a little bit. So all the things that should be changed to make higher education more inclusive. And then the other level of looking at it is thinking about the ways in which you come to these improvements. And that has to do with participation of young people with disabilities in those spaces. And that's, I think, where great examples come in from the Stakeholder Group of Persons with Disabilities that International Disability Alliance is coordinating. And that's a place where organizations of persons with disabilities come together and work together to mainstream the perspective of persons with disabilities in the Sustainable Development Goals. And something else that was really a good example of how to include the voices of young people with disabilities in these discussions is the Global Disability Summit that took place in 2022. Where young people with disabilities were in the lead to organize these conversations. And I think that's such a great example of young leadership of persons with disabilities, and especially in the field of education and higher education, that is a key solution, I think, to resolving the issues that I just mentioned earlier. Just one final thing I would like to point out to you is the call to action that was put out by International Disability Alliance and Site Savers combined as part of their Equal World campaign. And in it, the voices of young people with disabilities through the IDA Youth Representative Group are combined into 10 concrete action points that governments should take when they negotiate the Summit of the Future final products, outcome documents. So I would really recommend you to look into those if you're active in, if you're going to be active in the Summit of the Future talking stage, and to really think about the ways in which you can make these negotiations more inclusive, more accessible, and include the voices of young people with disabilities in them. Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak here, and hopefully see you somewhere in New York.
Let me please turn the floor to Dr. Pedro and share some of the experiences that have been done through regional and national efforts on supporting right to higher education for students with disabilities.
Yeah, thank you, Lily. I was really impressed. It's a pity that we couldn't hear the sound, but certainly the experience of the University of Gondar is really remarkable when it comes to examples in the global south. I just, in the interest of time, I just want to bring 4 examples coming from 4 different countries in the global south that show 4 different pathways to ensure that the inclusion of students with disability is really taking place in higher education. And I'm going to provide only 4 examples, which is in a way the affirmative principle that despite the fact that I started with very negative comments, I mean, a lot of changes are taking place. Let me start by making reference to a particular case of a normative change, which took place in South Africa, because I think that this is one of the few countries in the global south that has a specific law called the Disability Framework on the Post-School Education and Training sector since 2018. And this is the result of extensive consultations with civil society, NGOs, and the main stakeholders, including as well the South African Disability Alliance, as well as other organizations, which support the principle that nothing about us without us, which I think the student representative already mentioned using different words. I think that this is really, really a good example of how sometimes not only the normative change in itself, but also the process leading to that normative change can be positive because it provides opportunities for dialogue among different stakeholders. So that's just one example. One could say that changing norms is not enough. Okay, I'm going to bring a second example, which is about financing. And I think that this one comes from Brazil. Brazil has had since the, again, late 90s, what they call a financing system of quotas in higher education, meaning by that the federal government has put a lot of effort in terms of financial resources to ensure that a given percentage of students, either with disabilities or belonging to communities that are underrepresented in higher education, such as women in certain cases, Afro-descendants, indigenous populations, have a seat granted in higher education, through which, to reach that level, they have to comply with a certain number of requirements, but they have their own, I would say, process for getting there. And as a matter of fact, that funding formula has achieved that 30% of students in the most prestigious universities in Brazil, the so-called federal universities, have already or belong already to either the communities of students with disabilities or students coming from indigenous peoples, populations, or Afro-descendants in particular. So it's a huge change because it has brought diversity to very prestigious universities. Now, these two are, I would say, government initiatives. Let's go down to some things that have been also happening, just an example, in the classroom, okay? I would like to bring here the example of the Inclusive University Initiative in Bangladesh, already dated back to 2019, which shows that in the global south, particularly in countries which are not really rich, it is very important to count on partnerships involving also the private sector. And I think that this is yet an example where, for instance, a number of universities and also the Aga Khan Foundation have been able to bring into the classroom equipment, software, applications, just to make sure that students with disabilities can really get access to resources in the university's platforms. And I think it's also important. I think that this is often not mentioned, but it's really an added value of this particular approach. 80% of the staff involved in this project are actually staff with physical disabilities, which is in itself a good example. And finally, my most favorite example comes from Indonesia, because this is, well, one could say it's a no-cost approach to inclusion. It's as simple as that. The University of Brawijaya Center for Disability Services and Sunan State Islamic University have initiated a companion student program in which volunteer students are taught Indonesian Sign Language and paired with hearing impaired students. This is an example, I would say, of a simple, low-cost accommodation measure, but really having an impact on both the lives of the students with disabilities and the ones who have. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Pedro. And altogether, Professor Heather, Dr. Mula, and Dr. Pedro provided this very holistic and very hopeful, practice that has been done at institutional level, at national level, and some at regional level. I'm gonna change the program very quickly because I know we have another round of discussion, but at this point, the examples are so outstanding. I would like to open up the floor to our dear participants and see if you have any, feedback or reflection in this regard, especially if someone can touch upon the tool of innovation and how digital transformation of higher education has been, in a way, changing, and in another way, providing hope and reshaping the area of work in right to higher education. So I want to see if anyone would like to take the floor.
Am I loud enough? I think I'm loud enough.
Yeah, please use it so that the
Right. All right.
hear you.
Sorry, I'm late. I got stuck at the security because my name is not on the list. My name is Giras. I'm from Indonesia. As you mentioned, I'm very grateful that I'm a recipient of the affirmative scholarship from the Indonesian government for people with disabilities. Forever grateful with that. Thank God for Indonesia for having so much money. I was wondering, I think in the global south it's very common for us to have affirmative scholarship, be it for underrepresented group, women, people with disabilities, indigenous, like for example, in Indonesia, we have affirmative action for people from Papua, for example, be it in the civil service, be it in the higher education. My concern is, and I know UN has already done that as well, since I know my background is in international law, and for example, like in CEDAW, we know that in the CEDAW, we should give women an affirmative action. But I don't want to name country, but probably you kind of get it. Some countries think that affirmative action is unconstitutional. So what's your approach to that when affirmative action is surprisingly very, very supportive? It's gained a lot of popularity in developing countries. I'm one of the recipients, and I'm forever grateful for that. But in major developed countries, this kind of affirmative action is seen as unconstitutional. It kind of seems like a barrier to us. Thank you.
Anyone?
So I think you're hinting at the United States, but and since I'm in the United States, so to my understanding, affirmative action for disability is not illegal, but for other underrepresented groups it is. And so yeah, you can hire someone just because they have a disability. You don't have to, but you can. But yeah, I think that, yeah, it's very interesting, but I just wanted to comment on that.
No, I'm just talking like probably in general. Yeah, I mean, of course, it's something I get because it's only on race, right? In the United States, but like, it can be a slippery slope. You never know.
Yes, please.
No. There is.
Okay.
Thank you. So thank you all for being here and providing such great and informative remarks. I have a question for any of the panelists, I think, because you all gave such interesting talks. So how can we mobilize other activists, whether they be in the youth category or maybe less so in that category, to help students with disabilities receive access to higher education? And how can we make sure that we hold, institutions accountable for really including these students and giving them a voice? Thank you.
I can try to start off. I think when it comes to partnerships among different youth groups and student groups, it's really pivotal that we do not think, okay, now we're going to focus on students with disabilities, and then everyone who want to focus on students with disabilities go into a corner and only talk to other people who want to focus on that. Then people who want to focus on climate only talk to people who want to focus on climate, because these things are interlinked and we have to work together. So I think in my approach in Global Student Forum, it's really to say, how do I make sure that our people who work on education financing also are aware of the struggles that students who has disabilities face? How do I make sure that our gender initiatives are also inclusive of perspectives of students who have disabilities? One of the things that we are trying to do right now, and we'll be launching it in the coming months, is a focus on collecting best practices of successful student initiatives when it comes to students with disabilities. And it's because we just look at our membership and there's a lot of good experiences out there, but it's very much dependent on you knowing someone who has worked on it before. So as a global platform, we have that responsibility to say, okay, there's a great thing going on over here, there's a great thing going over here. Let's collect it, let's share it, let's empower our membership. And I think that's what we can do on a global level. But I think on a personal level, and as someone who wants to take action, it's also about making sure that the approach in its core is intersectional.
I kind of want to connect it to the intersectional part. I'm Alejandra. I'm from Mexico. I'm part of the UNESCO IESALC delegation. And this kind of touches a bit of my personal experience. I'm a late diagnosed autistic woman who didn't receive her diagnosis until when I was 30 years old in grad school. And so, it comes from a lot of different just a lot of different factors. But I guess my question, and it could be for any of the panelists, it's around if you know of any innovation, particularly thinking to combat ableism, and practices also intersecting with gender. And I'm thinking, with combating ableism with families, with community members, and also the healthcare system. And I'm thinking also a lot with diagnosis, right? And this is more of this particular disability. But I wonder if anyone has a contribution around that.
So I have a nonprofit for autism and neurodiversity advocacy. So I can kind of answer to the part of the autism piece. Late diagnosis is a very big problem in the autism community, particularly for women, because they studied young boys, as you probably know, when they first created the criteria for diagnosing autism. And so I'm very involved in the community and the research sense, and I really haven't seen a lot of programs addressing ableism in the autism community, especially ones that are led by autistic people too. But one organization that's great is the Autistic Self-Advocacy Network. And then I would obviously recommend you to check out my nonprofit.
Thank you so much. So just for everyone's information, we actually will have another round of Q&A and audience interaction. So we will take one more person, and then we'll continue with the round of discussion. Oh yes, we'll have two. We'll have two, and then we'll get to the next round.
Hello, everyone. My name is Lynn Seville, and I'm from Haiti, and I'm also a member of the UNESCO SDG4 Youth Student Network. I also have a nonprofit based in Haiti and also working here. We work with young students with using creativity and technology in Haiti from vulnerable communities. I have more of a point I want to share than a question. Is from what I realized in my country is most of the time the disability that the student get when they are, I work with people 16 to 25, there are things that could have been resolved if they get diagnostic or cure way before that. So the thing I realized is most people or organizations get involved in the country, but it's kind of too late for the student. Also, the cultural part when the parents doesn't know what's going on with the student. When we're talking about education, my concern is to also educate the parents and the community. Sometimes there are things that the parent could have managed better, or sometimes in my country, and most importantly, they don't really understand that someone who lost their vision can still go to school, or someone, or woman who lost his whatever it is, can still learn and continue and work. That's one thing I always want to share is when we're educating the young people, the youth, the community, and the parent are most important, because sometimes that is the blockage that they have most of the time, especially in the developing country.
Yes, please.
Thank you. I just wanted to address the question made by the Indonesian student about affirmative action. It's a very complex issue. But let me just share with you three ideas. One is that in a perfect world, affirmative action wouldn't be needed. Okay. Now, the justice system of the country you didn't mention consider that we are already in a perfect world, except when it comes to getting or granting access to military schools, where they still accept the affirmative action principle. Okay, so I leave it to you to decide whether that country is a perfect world or not when it comes to equity of educational opportunities. Now, having said that, from a research perspective, which is what we mostly do at the Institute, we have demonstrated, and I'm saying this very clearly because we are about to release a report on that, we have demonstrated that affirmative action initiatives have been really very effective in many countries in the world. Okay, you already referred to that as a personal example, but we have also numbers showing that those initiatives are making a difference. And that's why, at least from the perspective of UNESCO, we are very supportive of those affirmative action initiatives for the time being. When we reach a level when we all live in a perfect world, maybe we will also support the idea that affirmative action should be open. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Hi, well, we can see everyone is already very excited. So before everyone get even more excited, let's go back to what a realistic world, which is already perfect enough on the great example that Queen's University and University of Gondar have created through their projects on the ground.
Inclusivity means to access the system, to show equally person with disabilities and person with non-disabilities. All roads must be accessible. All education systems is accessible.
Inclusiveness means creating a world that is suitable for everyone, for you, for me, having an environment that is suitable for everyone. In Ethiopia, there are more than 15 million persons with disabilities.
እንደ ኢትዮጵያ ሲታይ የአካል ጉዳተኞች መብት ወደ ታች ተጭኖ ነው ያለ ማለት ያ ማለት ምንድነው? መብታቸውንም ካለማወቅ እንደጋ ደግሞ ህግ ከማውጣት ህግ ከላይ ከማውጣት ጀምሮ ህግ ሲያወጡም የአካል ጉዳተኛውን መብት የአካል ጉዳተኛውን ሁኔታ ግምት ውስጥ ያላስገባ ነው ብዬ ስለማስብና እዚያ ጋር ምናልባት እኔ ህግ መማሬ ለአካል ጉዳተኞች ወይም ቮይስ ፎር ቮይስለስ መብት ድምፅ ለሌላቸው እኔ ድምፅ ሆናቸዋለሁ ብዬም ስላሰብኩ ነው።
A nation cannot achieve by discriminating large segments of society. The University of Gondar is receiving a large number of students with disability. They are getting access to education and they are treated equally.
Our vision is to support young people with disabilities to be transformative leaders. It is the right of every person, every individual to be included.
I was born in a rural area, so my families had no awareness about disability. It was very difficult.
የተወለድኩት ገጠር አካባቢ ስለሆነ ገጠር አካባቢ ያለው የማህበረሰቡ ግንዛቤ እንደማልችል አድርገው ነበር ሲያስቡ ነበር። ይብን ቤተሰብ አካባቢ ወደ ኋላ ሲቀንቱ ሲሉ ነበር። ቤተሰብ እኔ እንዳልወጣ እንድማርም አይፈልጉ ነበር። ያን ቻሌንጅ ብዙ ነበር። ሌላም ስማር ራሱ ወደ ታች ገጠር ላይ እንዳለው በእጄ ነበር ሲሄደው የነበረ። በእጄ ጭቃ አለ፣ ውርጭ አለ። በእጄ ሲሄድ ደስ ነበር። ያ ጭቃና ገብቼ ክላስ ላይ ስለመማር ወረቀት ለመጻፍ ይቸገር ነበር በእጄ ጭቃ ስለሚሆን። ስለዚህ በልብስ ጠርጌ ምናምን ነበር ሲማር የነበረ። እሱ በጣም ብዙ የሆነ ቻሌንጅ ነበረ።
The biggest challenge I face is the society's attitude. For example, when you want to go to buy something from the supermarket, the people they see, oh, they will be frightened. They always told you, oh, brother, you can't do it.
They cannot understand.
I always told myself, don't listen others. Because if you give your ear to others, they will break you. And if you break, it's difficult to rise up again. So I always encouraging myself, tell myself, if I have a vision and a dream that I want to achieve, so I only focus to my dreams. There are so many people who surround me and teach me positive things to become a strong person and to be a role model for others.
Empowerment is very essential. I want to advocate for voiceless people. It's not only for persons with disability.
እንግዲህ ከአካል ጉዳተኛ ውጭ ሌላ የተገለለ ቡድን ግመን ማህበረሰብ ወይም ደግሞ የሶሳይቲ ፓርት ብዬ ማስበው ሴቶች ናቸው። ሴቶች አብዛኛው ጊዜ ወደ ገጠሩ አካባቢ ስንሄድ ብዙ ጊዜ በወንዶች እንትን ተብለው ተጨቁነው ወይም ደግሞ በእነሱ ስር ሆነው ወንዶች እንደፈለጉ የሚያደርጓቸው።
If women have the chance to do, they can do it as men can do it. I believe what makes transformative leadership is being open for all. Africa is waiting me. I will make the difference in this world and I'm the next change maker.
So the video finally worked. So we got the message that empowerment is essential. Yeah, thank you so much for this really beautiful work on the ground, and which really paves the road for our very last round of key messages on identifying the role of each stakeholder and meaningful partnership among us all in moving this forward. So with this said, if possible, I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Rio Haddad first and explore and really elaborate on how can collaborative partnership among youth with disabilities, educators, grassroots organizations, social services, and other stakeholders contribute to create a more inclusive and healthier environment for all in this regard.
Yeah, so I know that we almost out of time. So, and a lot has been said already about multi-stakeholder partnership. So I just want to make my 3 points in a way that kind of recaps what I heard here. But first, we heard about to have an inclusive education. we heard that we need to have educators, administrators with disabilities. Their presence is very critical because they add invaluable diversity to the faculty and help cultivate an organizational culture. It's the same with the UN system. We have senior managers. We try to have more senior managers, experts with disabilities, and including in my office, and that really has changed the culture in our organizations, the way that we approach diversity, and we all learn a lot from that experience. Second, we need to have comprehensive support system. We need to have human assistance, social services. We talked about grassroots organization partnership with universities. These are very important in creating a more inclusive and healthier education environments. We heard about the peer support networks, the students to students, both with the persons with disabilities, but also with without disabilities. We need also cultural adaptation, assisted technologies, logistical support. Financing is important. We heard about interesting experience from the Brazil or partnership with the private sector in Bangladesh as well. But and I'll end with this. And what I think is most needed here is the cultural change, cultural shift. So we need to promote awareness and advocacies. And essentially, we need to create more of this kind of a successful human rights stories and telling and sharing that story is a powerful means to promote understanding, reduce stigma. We talked about the intersectional discriminations. We're not only talking about ableism here, but also sexism, ageism. The young people not being heard. This ageism is very prevalent in society, both for the young people and older people. So we need our commitment to increase inclusivity that drives that our agenda towards that inclusion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for this very strong message. So I'll now turn to Mr. Jakab Blasius to talk about the whole institutional approach, some of the strategies to transfer policies into action, especially in, as a higher education stakeholder yourself, but combining other higher education stakeholder, how do you see the policies being shaped and transferred into practices in promoting inclusivity?
There's a lot that can be done by empowering the individual teacher, giving them the tools to understand and to navigate different forms of disabilities. There's a lot that can be done to foster conversations between students and teachers about experiences and about opening up that conversation, that it's okay to have those conversations about what is needed, what is the different kinds of initiatives that can be taken to support specific students, because even though there's a lot of different categories of disabilities, every student's experience is unique. So it also needs to be flexible enough to cater to the individual student's experience. And therefore, the systems need to be flexible enough, and the teachers needs to be equipped with the tools to have those kind of conversations. And then we cannot only let it be about the teacher-student relationship. It also needs to be more fundamental to the higher education institution. Because if you just leave it alone to the students, then all other factors like schedules and finances and all those kind of things that eventually also plays into everything else will be dominant in these conversations. So we need to make sure that there is the adequate institutional support. And then I think also going back here to speak before with the focus on rights and not the focus on we want to do good for a specific group of students. It's about rights, it's about opportunities, it's about making sure that students know that this is something that they have a right to and that they can claim and that they shouldn't be afraid to ask for. Because often I fear that there is so many students that might need support or help but are afraid to ask because they don't want to be bothered, they don't want to be seen as that student who creates the problem, who's like, oh no, like, oh, we have to spend finances and all those kind of things. And we need to turn the conversation around and say it is a basic right that you are here and that you have the tools and the systems that makes it possible for you to succeed in this education. I want to go back to the initiatives that we are taking at the moment about collecting best practices and success stories for student-led initiatives and student advocacy for students with disabilities. So if you sit there, both here in the room and also in our virtual participants, and have those stories and those best practices that you want to share with us, we're really, really open to hear it, because for us, it's also about bringing that knowledge out there to say, other people had this success. This is also something that you can implement at your level. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jacob. And I'd like to turn to Professor Heather with the same question. And really, from an institutional perspective, what roles do you envision different stakeholders play in shaping policies and transferring practices that can promote inclusivity for students with disability?
Thank you. I think it's really important, especially when we're talking about higher education in contexts like Ethiopia, but really around the world, is to focus on this idea of progressive realization. In countries that have signed the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, it's not okay to say, well, we don't have the finances, so we can't include persons with disabilities. It's every step is a step towards realization of the full human rights and inclusion of persons with disabilities, so we have to do it. I think it's really critical to have institutional guidance from the very highest levels that then trickles down. We've, in my own research and in my own work, we've heard from teachers who say, well, I want to do reasonable accommodations in my classroom, but I don't know what I can do, or I don't know how to do it. I don't know what's appropriate. So we need that institutional guidance, that institutional policy to support the teachers, and not just support, but enforce that teachers do meet a certain standard for reasonable accommodation for students with disabilities, but then also offer the resources and the ability for teachers to be able to offer those reasonable accommodations in their classrooms. We also need to, like I alluded to earlier, a lot of the changes at the institutional level have come from self-advocacy, from youth advocacy. So we need to support that to continue, giving youth knowledge of policies, both at the convention level, but then also at institutional policy. How do we give them a knowledge base that they can then use as a platform for their advocacy and demand action? But then also thinking about, we can't forget staff at institutions. It's not just in the classroom, but student housing, student dining, IT, career transitions. All staff need to have a basic level of knowledge around inclusion and human rights of students with disabilities. And then also policies, they're necessary, they set the direction, but they also need to be implemented with flexibility and individualization, with the goal in mind, the spirit of the policy in mind, but sticking to policies strictly may not enable the flexibility that sometimes we need to find the solutions for inclusion. And then I'll just end by saying, again, echoing my colleague from Human Rights, that this is an educational ecosystem. You can't talk about inclusion at the tertiary level if you don't consider what comes before that. Also considering disciplinary access. We've heard many students with disabilities speak about how they didn't get to pursue what they dreamed about. They didn't get to pursue their passion, whether it was for engineering or medicine, or particularly in science and technology and STEM disciplines. They're told, go into social sciences, go into law because you have a visual impairment. So I think that's, but again, so students need access to basic science and math and technology education at the elementary school level, at the high school level, so that they are positioned for success at tertiary level in the discipline that is their passion, and so they can follow their dreams.
Thank you so much, Professor Adler. You touch upon a very important and down-to-earth function of higher education, which is across the discipline. So with that said, I want to turn the floor to Professor Molo to talk about to elaborate on pedagogical strategies and methodologies that can actually be employed to ensure that curriculums are catered to the diverse needs of students, ensuring inclusivity for all.
Thank you, Lily. I would like to start with there has to be the human element in the curriculum in pedagogy, because our teachers and educators, academic leaders lack the soft skill, because the focus is on standard. So we need that kind of the soft skill and the human element. And the other is the holistic approach is very important. We know about universal design for learning, but at the same time, we need to have individualized education plan, because bringing students all to get different learners in one classroom, but we have to understand the context. Sometimes in developing countries, teachers have large number of students. They don't have enough time to support individuals, but still we can have tutorials and peer support, but we have to consider that one. And the other is whatever we do should be, again, culturally, locally sensitive. We have to, as I said, unpack what the reasonable accommodation mean, what inclusive education mean, how we can support my student in classroom. It's very important. We say technology is important we have to use technology to provide educational materials in different formats for different learners. For example, the student with visual impairment, they need materials in different formats for deaf student and for students who have mobility related impairment. So this kind of tailoring and disaggregating is very important. But lastly, the power of partnership in working together and listening the voice of student is very important.
Thank you so much, Dr. Molo. And what you just elaborated translates very well to what Julia will be discussing about in terms of impact of technology and innovation. So Julia, to what extent do you consider technology can be leveraged to enhance accessibility and then foster a supportive learning environment for students with disability? And what challenges, of course, among all those digital transformation may arise throughout this process?
Yeah, so I think this is an area for a lot of transformative impact. I think that technological innovations, they can really break down barriers and give unprecedented opportunities for inclusivity. And this can enable students with disabilities to fully engage in their educational pursuits. And so advancements in things like assistive technologies such as screen readers, speech-to-text software, alternative and augmentative communication devices have really revolutionized accessibility for students with disabilities in the educational sphere. And things like online platforms and virtual classrooms can offer flexible learning experiences for students with disabilities. And technologies like augmented reality and virtual reality can also hold a lot of promise for students with disabilities that have various learning styles. Obviously, challenges can arise from this. One significant challenge is the digital divide, those that don't have access to internet connectivity or access to technology. This can exacerbate existing inequalities, particularly for marginalized communities. And so ensuring the compatibility and usability of assistive technologies across different platforms can pose technical hurdles. And so the rapid pace of technological advancement also necessitates ongoing training for educators and students on how to use these technologies for educational purposes. And while technology offers unprecedented opportunities for inclusivity, there is a risk of worsening existing inequities if accessibility considerations are not considered when making these digital technologies. And so valid concerns regarding data privacy, security, and bias of tools like artificial intelligence must also be carefully navigated to safeguard the rights and confidentiality of all students. And so finally, when addressing these obstacles, it's critical that diverse key groups really work together on this. Educators, technologists, policymakers, and disabled students themselves can collaborate in order to make digital literacy among all students, eliminate obstacles to access, and really develop these technological solutions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Juliet. So, I mean, with that being said, it's not possible that we have a lot of great ideas, but not equipping higher education stakeholders with the relevant tools to move forward. You cannot just assign them responsibility and lead. So with that said, I'd like to give the floor to Dr. Frances Pedro to conclude this section. We're really discussing what skills and competences are needed from higher education stakeholders, including professors, administrators, managers, to effectively support students with disabilities, and what measures can be implemented to ensure comprehensive training to relevant stakeholders in higher education from policy perspective, from project perspective, and beyond.
Just three final considerations, I would say. One is that I couldn't agree more with what has been said until now by all the panelists. Second point, I think it's important that that we realize that we talk a lot about which includes, from a lifelong learning perspective, includes higher education. And for many teachers and institutional authorities in higher education, that basically means that growing numbers of students will come to universities. Okay, so it's just an issue basically of an economy of scale. Now we're going to have more students, so we need more funding. Okay, but I don't think that many times they realize that the right to higher education means as well that we need to change the nature of the provision, because otherwise, I mean, that provision is not going to reach everyone according to their needs and their abilities and capacities. So I think that taking maybe the concept that comes from the software industry of universal design, we should start thinking about the need to transform teaching practices to make sure that we are inspired by this idea that the way we teach, the content we teach, should be universal, at least in terms of, the ambition to reach everyone. And if not, if we cannot make it because there is an extra mile that requires a specific device or technology, we should also have that device at our service. That would be my second thought. And finally, the third one is that is just, I would say, it's an internal reflection, a humble one. I think that the UN system, and particularly UNESCO and our institute, let me take our responsibility, should be doing more in terms of capacity development for leaders, particularly student voices coming from groups with disabilities. I think that that's the right way to go. It's not simply meeting and talking about them, as it has been said, but also making sure that we provide training opportunities, that we provide fora through which they can really use us as sparrings, so to say, to make sure that their capacities to really influence, policy at institutional level, at national level, or even internationally, grow. Okay, I think that would be and I accept our responsibility. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We all have a responsibility, but we all have a future. So with that said, I'd like to turn to Eugenia again to pave the road for us into the future.
Awesome. So we'd like to just thank you all for coming today, and seeing as though the time is about 11:20, we want to make sure that everybody's able to contribute to this group as best as possible, and we kind of share around the voice. So instead of kind of a Q&A session, we're going to be looking towards calls to action. We've heard a number of wonderful contributions that underscore the amount of collaboration that is needed between different levels of education, how higher education does not start on its own, how there is education before and there's education after. And here, this was an educational process that we're leaving with insights from qualified individuals who have something to say. And we recognize that there are voices that work here in this room with us that we each here are going to work to fight for. So in that spirit, we're looking to kind of pass around the microphone, share our thoughts, and bring forth a couple calls to action. encourage that, and so I'll pass the microphone down this way. Something growth.
So thank you so much to the organizers for hosting this important event. And thank you so much to the speakers for sharing all of your insights and for the wonderful work that you do. My big takeaway is that as a representative of the UNESCO SDG for Youth and Student Network, which mobilizes activists to pave the way for SDG for quality education, I'm excited to work with my colleagues and education activists in the space to make sure that all students receive access to their higher education that they are entitled to.
Hi. So I also work in an Irish higher education institute where I support students with different abilities. One thing is that we should be promoting more inclusive language, which means people with different abilities, not disabilities, because they have different abilities for the fact. The other thing that I came across while two of our panelists were talking, that they also consider the feedback from the students and the leadership. Now, for the right reasons and the facts that have been discussed, it would be more good for these higher education institutes to have those student representatives as the colleagues on the committees which actually decide their future and their inclusion within those institutes. So yeah, that's my bit and suggestion that I've come across in my last 3 years of working with students with disabilities. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I think my name is Anushka. I'm one of the co-managers that supports the University of Gondar and Queen's University project from the Queen's University side. As an occupational therapist, one thing we try to do clinically is really work ourselves out of a job. That's when you know you're being a good OT, because you want to enable and empower your clients. And I think for me in this, I sort of am sitting here feeling like I shouldn't be the one who's here. And how do I work myself out of this seat and position so that the person with disabilities can be here speaking? And so I think my call to action for myself, personally and professionally, is to really think about how do I create space so that I can get out of the way, and so that the individuals who are with lived experience can be here and share their voice.
Thank you very much. My name is Masarat. I'm from University of Gondar. I'm co-managing this project. I think we learned a lot from different perspectives, from developing to developed countries. And as this perspective shows us, still there is too much work to do, especially in changing the attitudes of those people, to include those students with disabilities and to get them access for higher education, let alone that the higher education, if we go to that of the lower levels of education, that very few are included in this education system, and especially in those developing countries. So we have to advocate, and we have to change attitudes of people to bring their children to even to the school. So we are seeing that different discriminations, not only that in those developing countries, but also I learned that even in this developed world, unemployment issues are the most important issue raised by my colleagues. So we have to bring that holistic approach to change these attitudes of the people to inclusive education, inclusive employment, and equity as a whole. Thank you very much.
Hi, my name is Chris, and I'm a philosophy and education master student from Teachers College, Columbia University. I met Lily on the day, the International Day of Education, and it's an honor that I can be a part of this a conference. And, thanks to higher education, I got a chance to be a part of it. Right? So after hearing your all speeches, I think one thing that I want to ask is most of the schools are relying on the banking style of education, meaning focusing on standardized exam scores, and the fact-based knowledge, where we neglect social justice issues and the human rights issues. And I believe no educator loves it, but we have to live with it because it is our non-perfect world. A total education transformation will for sure help school and help the society to focus on human rights issues and education more, but it needs time to be changed in order to reach a new, more holistic style of education. So on a more realistic level, how do we integrate education that focus more on human rights issues with our current non-perfect banking style education model? Furthermore, how to address low school students ratio in a more population dense countries in where education itself is already a privilege, and integrate new educational model into these countries in order to not give in order to give all students, all people, equal rights and opportunity to be a part of the higher education. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, my biggest takeaway as someone, I was an educator, I was in the classroom for 8 years, and then now I'm a consultant and training and providing professional development for teachers at Harvard Graduate School of Education. And I think for me, my biggest takeaway, and was shared over here, I'm sorry, I don't recall exactly who said it, but it was about fostering conversations, like among teachers and students. I think like that's something that gets lost many times when we're trying to implement things or change things in the classroom. So yeah, just creating like safe spaces for meaningful conversations, right?
Awesome. And just quickly, we just wanted to remind you guys just keep it to a call for action. Just as we're approaching kind of 11:30 to make sure you guys can get to your next sessions. Yeah, continue on.
So I'll be brief because I've already shared a lot of my thoughts. But I think we need more awareness, we need more acceptance, amplifying disabled voices, particularly students, but also faculty and staff, because when the students see representation in faculty and staff, that can mean a lot to them. And amplifying voices who are multiply marginalized. And I think that's something I need to do a lot more in my advocacy. And then just lastly, to conclude, just because the United States has laws about accessibility doesn't mean they're being followed. And also including people with invisible disabilities in disability advocacy is really important too.
There's the core thing is also that we don't need to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of great things happening out there. Let's just promote them.
Fully agree with that. I think that we need, on the one hand, more data and more evidence about what works. That's one idea. Second idea, I think that we need to engage more in capacity development activities, be that for teachers, students, and third, I think that is the responsibility of international organizations in particular to promote that kind of conversations where we really promote ideas that would, in the long run or in the short run, promote change. Thank you.
We're gonna hand this microphone down.
Sure, thank you everyone. I'm Hui, sorry for coming late. Today I represent a faith-based organization called the Publicity Foundation, but on top of that, I'm already a member of the World Associations of Girl Guide and Girl Scout. So the reason why I'm late today is because I was in a diversity, equity, and inclusion training, because basically before we work with every girl, it's necessary, it's mandatory for us to go through this training before we go with them, work with them with their advocacy project. I would also like to echo the lady in front of us here. My call to action is how can we from the grassroots level actually find ways and find multiple channels to bring them here to the seat. as I could see in the APFSD, we see a lot of disabled persons joining the forum, but we didn't really see a lot here in the ECOSOC Youth Forum. So I hope that's something that we could see and we could celebrate in the next year. Thank you.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Taibat Uzain, and I'm a member of the UNESCO SDG4 Youth and Student Network. And I'm also a doctoral researcher at the University of East Anglia, and I'm looking at digital technology and gender-based violence. And I think when we're talking about students with disability, we should also be considering their safety within the educational institutions. So my call to action is that as we're thinking about infrastructure to promote access to higher education for students with disability, we should also be thinking about how to promote measures to safeguard them and protect them within higher education institution, because we can see data and statistics saying that students with disability are at a higher rate of experiencing gender-based violence than students without disability. So I think we should also be thinking about these as we're thinking about promoting access for them in higher education institutions. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Aldrin. I'm part of the UNESCO IESALC delegation, and I'm really here for my nonprofit as well. Our nonprofit, Handom, it stands for Dream. We work with kids in the Philippines too, who are very poor, but very smart, and we want to get them into better high schools. And so I guess my call to action is twofold, in the sense that I want to have a call to action for youth like myself who work with kids. And it's never really been under the back of my mind that this is a thing that needs to be, that needs to be written down, right? It needs to be spoken about. I think when you work with children, you have to be cognizant that there might be children who might need more than the others, and empathy really at the end of the day. And I got really inspired by what you were saying, sir, about those examples from all over the world and from the Philippines. And I feel like it's very political things that happen in the Philippines. And I think my call to action to my country, Philippines, for listening is, why don't we do better? Why don't we take a look at the other countries that are doing so much better when it comes to equity and things like this, and learn from them, set aside political differences and just do it. Thank you.
Okay, probably I already expressed my concern. Again, my name is Kiras. I'm the chief of the UN Association in Indonesia. Professionally, I work for the International Criminal Court. So what do I know about education? The only thing I know about inclusion in education is my own personal experience in higher education. So based on my personal experience, I will just say that sensitization of faculty. So what if we have funding? So what if we have infrastructure? So what if our campus have a student center for disability? If my own professor, when I ask for resources, they are not sensitized on disability. So what if they respect disability in classroom? If it's a separated entity that, okay, this is classroom, and then you have your own student center for disability and go figure it on your own. So sensitization is very important. It doesn't matter if you have the funding. It doesn't matter if you have a center. So what? If you can use it, if the faculty, the people there can use it, if only the dean, the academic director is only sensitized to it, if your faculty is not sensitized, I'm not in touch with the dean, I'm not in touch with the director. I'm on my day-to-day, I'm with my professor. So I expect them to accommodate me. Thank you.
And I'm just gonna go bring the microphone over here. Okay. Yeah, you're good to continue.
So I'm gonna relate back to my work here in terms of call to action. So this year there is a very important moment across the street with the Summit of the Future. So my call is that we need more of the voices of young people, more persons with disabilities to be reflected into this process, and we will support that from our office, and also we need to advance within the UN system the disability inclusion strategy. Can you believe that the GA hall is still not disability accessible at the podium? There's no way for the wheelchair to climb up that place. So, thank you very much.
Thank you. I think that there's been so many important calls to action. I'll just echo my colleagues. More inclusion of people with disabilities themselves, particularly looking at next year's ECOSOC forum, and also more inclusion of conversation around the rights of persons with disabilities embedded within the main youth forum as well. Side events are important, but also seeing it as part of the main event is really critical as well.
My call to action is creating trust and social bonding with anyone who are working, and also be a part of their journey in building and fulfilling their dream lives.
As an autistic adult who's, what you say, diagnosed fairly late in his life, I would like to say that we need more awareness towards that.
So hello everyone, my name is Ajmal. I'm originally from Afghanistan. I lead a non-profit organization and I'm also a member of SDG for Youth and Student Network member. I have been working in Afghanistan for the past 8 years and now my focus through the organization, we work with young Afghan women, helping them enabling access to higher education. Since the schools and universities are closed for them, most of the young women who have disabilities, it gets harder for them to access to resources and technology due to that they cannot access online platforms. So it's really necessary that international organizations, beside raising awareness about all the human rights violation that's happening for them, they should also pay attention to why they are working on platforms for online education. So they should also think of those who have disabilities, because most of the young women, I think it's more than 20% of young women in each of the family members that they have disabilities, and also it's because of like the security situation that's happening in the past 3 years. It also increased the mental health issues, which is affecting their ideology and also the way that they have to get those higher education. So it's really necessary that resources and different opportunities should be available for them so they can access education beside that they have all the limitation. Thank you.
I just want to echo kind of what everyone has already said, but my name is Arissa. I'm from Toronto, Canada, but currently studying in Italy. I'm from the UNESCO SDG for Youth and Student Network. And I think my main takeaway and call to action today would be just around more accessibility and engagement of young people with disabilities in spaces at the UN. Yesterday or this morning, I can't remember, on some of the ECOSOC Youth Forum group chats, we were informed that many young people who have disabilities are not being able to access certain spaces, or they're not provided the support that they need in order to engage in conversations like this. So I know Jacob, you said we need more young people at the table, and so I really call upon all member states, all youth advocates, all representatives of kind of different UN systems to really think about logistically what needs to be done in order to bring more young people here. The other thing I wanted to mention is just around mental health, especially even if we look at the ECOSOC Youth Forum, it's an incredibly emotionally draining experience, I feel like, to be here and looking at the importance of discussing mental health in education. It also is very relevant in forums like this as well. So yeah, want to mention that too. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you very much for your calls to action. And I'm going to pass it on to Lily just to close things up.
Thank you so much. We have a lot of voices that matter, and we have a lot of actions move forward together. I just want to close this session by really expressing our gratitude to all the participants, panelists here today, but also to our online participants who have been really patient with us, and very special thanks to our very dear interpreters who have been really tolerating with the delay and supporting with until the end of the session. Thank you so much, and all of our ESOC team who were really up and beyond and behind the scene over the screen. And once again, we want to thank our host, the UN Office for South-South Cooperation, our co-host, co-organizer, Queen's University, and all of our partner organizations who contributed to this event, including the Office of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, University of Gondar, Global Student Forum, Stakeholder Group of Persons with Disability, UNESCO SDG for Youth and Student Network. Thank you all so much for being here, and let's work together in promoting right to higher education for students with disability. Thank you all.